You probably think food needs a fridge to survive. That belief is so deep you don't even question it anymore. Open the door, check the date, throw it out if it smells wrong. That's just how food works, right? Except it isn't. Not really. That's just how food works now. Go back about 100 years, drop yourself in the middle of the Arctic, somewhere so far from anything that the nearest help is weeks away by sled, and that whole idea falls apart. No electricity, no cooling, no supply chain, just ice, wind that can strip skin in minutes, and a handful of men trying to stay alive long enough to make it back. And in their pockets, in tin boxes packed onto sleds, they were carrying something that shouldn't have worked. A cookie. A small, dense, unglamorous little biscuit that had been sitting there for months, sometimes years, with zero refrigeration. And it was still good, still safe, still doing exactly what it was made to do. That's not a fun fact. That's a contradiction. And contradictions are usually where the interesting stuff is hiding, because somewhere along the way, we lost something. Not a recipe exactly, more like an instinct. The instinct to understand what actually keeps food alive, instead of just trusting a machine to do it for us. These were called power cookies, and the people who made them weren't chemists, they weren't running labs. They were explorers, expedition cooks, people who needed something that wouldn't spoil while they were out there fighting frostbite and exhaustion, and who didn't have the luxury of getting it wrong. Think about what that actually requires. A piece of food sitting in a wooden crate for 3 years, never touched by cold air from a compressor, never wrapped in anything more advanced than wax cloth, and still holding its nutrients, still safe to eat, still capable of putting warmth back into a freezing body. We've been taught to think shelf life is something you buy, a preservative you add, a package you seal in a factory, but these men were doing it with oats, dried milk, a little fruit, and fat. That's it. 4 basic things, understood deeply enough to outlast almost anything we make today. And here's the part that should bother you a little. We have refrigeration, vacuum sealing, chemical preservatives, climate-controlled warehouses, and most of our food still goes bad in days. They had none of that, and theirs lasted years. So maybe the problem was never really about technology. Maybe it's about understanding the materials in front of you so well that you don't need the technology at all. Picture the scene for a second. Wind so loud you can barely hear the man next to you. Hands too numb to feel the straps on your pack. Your body burning through energy faster than you can explain, faster than a normal meal could ever replace. You don't have a time to cook. You don't have the fuel to spare. What you have is one of these cookies and maybe a tin cup of water melted from snow. That single cookie was doing the job of an entire meal in a fraction of the time, in conditions that would ruin almost anything else you tried to bring with you. If this kind of forgotten engineering is the kind of thing that pulls you in, go ahead and subscribe now, because this channel is built around exactly this. The stuff people figured out long before we had the tools we rely on today, explain the way it actually happened, not the watered down version. So how did a simple cookie actually pull this off? How do you take something as fragile as food and make it outlast almost anything else in the supply chain without a single piece of modern equipment? The answer starts with something most people get completely backwards. They assume the cold was the enemy here, the thing they had to fight against. It wasn't. The cold was the method. Here's where it gets good. Because the moment you understand that the cold wasn't the obstacle, the whole thing starts to click into place. In most kitchens, in most pantries, in most modern food storage, moisture is the quiet killer. It's the thing that lets mold start. It's the thing bacteria need to multiply. You can have the best ingredients in the world, but if there's water hiding in there, it's only a matter of time. The Arctic doesn't have that problem. Cold, dry air pulls moisture out and keeps it out. It's not just freezing, it's drying. Constantly, relentlessly, in a way no kitchen counter could ever replicate. So instead of fighting the environment, the people making these cookies leaned into it completely. They started with the dry ingredients first. Oat flour or barley flour as the base, something sturdy, something that could hold structure without falling apart. Powdered milk for protein and calcium, the kind of nutrient density you need when your body is burning calories just to stay warm. Small fragments of dried fruit, mostly for energy, sometimes a little for morale, because even in the middle of nowhere, flavor still mattered. Then came the fat, rendered butter, sometimes lard, melted down and slowly worked into the dry mix until it formed something closer to a thick paste than a dough. This wasn't a casual step. The fat had to be incorporated carefully, evenly, so there were no dry pockets and no excess liquid pooling anywhere. And this is the part most people get completely wrong when they picture old survival food. They imagine something crude, something thrown together. It wasn't. The ratio of fat to dry ingredient mattered enormously. Too little fat and the cookie crumbles, loses its structure, can't hold together over months of travel. Too much fat and it never fully hardens, stays greasy, attracts exactly the kind of spoilage they were trying to avoid. So, there was a sweet spot. A balance these expedition cooks had clearly learned through trial and error, probably through failures nobody wrote down, the kind of knowledge that only comes from watching something go wrong enough times to finally get it right. Once that mixture was ready, it didn't just get shaped into cookies and left alone, it got compacted, pressed hard, again and again, pushing out every pocket of air hiding inside the dough. That detail matters more than it sounds like it should. Air pockets trap moisture. Moisture invites spoilage. By compressing the mixture as tightly as possible, they were physically removing the one thing that could undo all of this. No machine did that work. Hands did. Pressure did. Patience did. After shaping, the cookies were left out in the cold to harden. Sometimes laid on metal trays, sometimes simply set on packed ice. The fat inside began to solidify slowly, and as it did, it formed something close to a seal. Not a coating exactly, more like a structure, fat woven through every part of the cookie, locking moisture out and nutrients in. Subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment telling me which part of this process surprised you the most. Because honestly, this is the moment where the whole thing stops feeling like luck and starts feeling like genuine engineering. Once hardened, they were wrapped in waxed cloth or packed tightly into sealed tins, then loaded onto the sleds alongside the rest of the gear, and here's where the real payoff shows up. Properly made, stored in the right conditions, these cookies could last up to 3 years without spoiling. 3 years, no refrigeration, no chemical preservatives. Just fat, cold, and the absence of air doing exactly what they were designed to do. But the ingredients and the process are only half of it. Knowing how to make something that lasts is one thing. Knowing how to actually use it in the moment your body is shutting down from cold is a completely different problem. And that's where this story actually gets interesting. Imagine you're hours into a march across open ice. Your fingers stopped feeling normal a while ago. Your thoughts are slower than they should be. That fuzzy, syrupy feeling that creeps in right before real trouble starts. You're not just tired. You're losing heat faster than your body can produce it, and every minute that passes makes the next decision a little harder to make clearly. This is exactly the moment these cookies were built for. Not breakfast, not a snack between meals. A response to a body in crisis. Eaten on their own, they delivered an immediate hit of fat and carbohydrate, the fastest fuel the body knows how to use. But the smarter move, the one experienced expedition members learned quickly, was to break the cookie apart and drop it into hot water melted from snow or ice. Within a few minutes, that dense little biscuit dissolved into something closer to a thick, warm porridge. And that combination, heat plus dense nutrition, did two things at once. It raised core body temperature from the inside, which matters more than people realize when you're fighting hypothermia. And it delivered a concentrated dose of energy precisely when the body needed it most. Not gradually, over an hour like a normal meal, but fast, almost immediately. Some teams went further. They'd crush in a bit of dried coffee, or a pinch of whatever spice they'd managed to bring along. Not for any nutritional reason, just to make the moment feel a little less brutal. A small comfort in an environment that offered almost none. That detail says something too. Survival wasn't only about staying alive, it was about staying sane long enough to keep moving. Here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. These weren't backup rations. They weren't the thing you ate when everything else ran out. They were often the primary fuel source during the most demanding stretches of a journey, specifically because nothing else packed that much usable energy into that little weight and that little space. Think about what that means for someone hauling a sled across hundreds of miles of ice. Every single ounce matters. Every item earns its place or gets left behind. And these cookies earned their place again and again, expedition after expedition, because the math simply worked. Maximum calories, minimum weight, near indestructible shelf life. This is where the real lesson starts to surface. We tend to think survival depended mostly on willpower, toughness, grit, and sure, those mattered, but the people who actually made it back, again and again, weren't just tougher than everyone else. They understood their materials. They understood fat as both fuel and preservation. They understood that dry, cold air was an ally, not a threat. They understood that solving a problem sometimes means studying it closely enough to use it against itself. That's a different kind of intelligence than we usually associate with extreme survival stories. It's quieter, less dramatic, but arguably more impressive because it's repeatable. It's a system, not a moment of luck. And once you see it as a system, everything connects. The ingredients were chosen for density and durability. The process was designed to remove the one variable, moisture, that could ruin everything. The storage method used the environment instead of fighting it. And the way they were eaten matched exactly what a freezing, exhausted body actually needed in that moment. Nothing here was accidental. Every piece fed into the next. So let's come back to where we started. The belief that food needs a fridge to survive. That without compressors and chemicals and sealed plastic, everything just rots within days. It's not that the belief is completely wrong. It's that it's incomplete. It only holds up if you don't understand what's actually happening inside the food in the first place. The moment you do, you realize refrigeration was never the only answer. It was just the easiest one to mass produce. What these explorers figured out, mostly through necessity, partly through trial and error, was something closer to a principle. Remove the moisture, seal it with fat, let cold do the rest. No factory required, no electricity required, just an honest understanding of why food actually spoils in the first place, and a willingness to work with that instead of around it. And there's something almost humbling about that. A small group of people, freezing, exhausted, carrying everything they owned on a sled, managed to solve a problem that still challenges modern food science in certain contexts. Long duration storage without refrigeration is still a genuinely hard problem today. Space agencies deal with it. Military logistics deal with it. And the rough blueprint was sitting in a tin of cookies more than 100 years ago. That's the part worth sitting with for a second. Not the cookie itself, the thinking behind it. Because so much of what we call innovation today is really just rediscovery. Someone, somewhere, hits a wall, looks for an easier shortcut, and stumbles back onto a principle that already existed. Just forgotten, buried under a few generations of convenience. These cookies weren't fancy. They weren't trying to be clever. They were trying to solve one very specific, very brutal problem. How do you keep a person alive and fueled in an environment that wants nothing more than for them to fail? And they did it with oats, milk powder, dried fruit, fat, pressure, and cold. 4 ingredients and 2 forces of nature combined with enough attention to detail that nothing was left to chance. There's a kind of intelligence in that, the kind that doesn't announce itself. No labs, no marketing claims, just years of expeditions, slowly refining something until it worked exactly when it needed to. If you found this as fascinating as I did putting it together, go ahead and subscribe. Hit that like button and tell me down in the comments what surprised you most about this whole process. I read through every comment, and honestly, some of you bring up details I haven't even thought about yet. What strikes me most, looking back at all of this, is how much we've traded understanding for convenience. We don't ask why food spoils anymore. We just trust the machine that keeps it from spoiling. And most of the time, that's fine. But every once in a while, it's worth remembering that the answer was never really about the technology. It was about understanding what you're working with well enough that you don't need the technology at all. A simple cookie carried across some of the harshest terrain on the planet, still holding everything it needed to deliver 100 years later. Not because it was advanced, because it was understood. And if a problem like that could be solved with this little, in conditions that brutal, it makes you wonder what else we've been overcomplicating without even realizing it. Next time, we're going deep into the survival rations that came after this one, the ones that push this same thinking even further into territory you won't believe people actually attempted. You're going to want that one.